I grew up in a house that smelled like fresh-baked bread on Sunday mornings and lemon polish on Saturday afternoons. Our home, a modest two-story with a neatly trimmed lawn and a white picket fence, was the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a family sitcom. It wasn't lavish, but it was comfortable, lived in, and filled with the sounds of life, laughter, music, the occasional argument over the remote. My parents, Richard and Diane, were high school sweethearts who built a life together in a quiet, suburban neighborhood. Dad worked in finance, a middle manager at some firm downtown, while Mom spent her days running a small bakery she had poured her heart into. They were hardworking, traditional, the kind of people who believed in Sunday dinners and summer road trips. And then there was my sister, Emma. 2 years younger than me, with golden curls and a smile that could charm even the grumpiest stranger. From the time she could walk, Emma had a way of commanding attention without even trying. She was the kind of kid who got extra scoops of ice cream just by batting her eyelashes, the kind who made friends wherever she went. She was sunshine, bright, warm, impossible to ignore. I was different. Quiet, bookish, the one who preferred sitting under a tree with a novel rather than playing tag with the neighborhood kids. I didn't mind, not really. I liked being alone with my thoughts, building imaginary worlds in my head, dreaming about all the places I would go someday. Our childhood was a good one. Summers were spent at the lake, splashing in the water until our skin wrinkled. Winters meant hot cocoa and board games by the fireplace. Birthdays were always a big deal, with homemade cakes and presents wrapped in bright paper. Everything about our family seemed picture-perfect from the outside. And for a long time, I believed it was. If you were to walk into our house on any given evening, you'd find my mother in the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, humming as she pulled fresh pastries from the oven. My father would be in his armchair, flipping through financial reports, sipping coffee from his favorite mug, the one with the faded lettering that read, "World's Best Dad." And Emma? She'd be sprawled across the living room floor, practicing her dance routines in front of the TV while I sat at the dining table, lost in my latest book. There was a rhythm to our lives, a steady predictability that I found oddly comforting. Mornings were filled with the scent of strong coffee and toasted bagels, the sound of Dad reminding us not to be late, the hurried footsteps of my mother running between the kitchen and the front door, making sure we had our lunches. Evenings meant long conversations over dinner, the occasional squabble over who got the last piece of pie, and the comforting lull of the TV in the background. My parents weren't rich, but they made sure we had everything we needed. Family vacations weren't extravagant, but they were filled with laughter, camping trips where we roasted marshmallows under the stars, road trips where we played endless rounds of I Spy. Every holiday was a grand affair, our house decorated to perfection, my mother baking enough sweets to feed the entire neighborhood. I remember the warmth of Christmas mornings, the way the lights twinkled on the tree as we unwrapped our presents. Birthdays were just as special, with homemade cakes and carefully chosen gifts. There was never a moment where I thought I was lacking anything. For years, I truly believed my parents saw Emma and me as equals, that their love was divided equally between us. I thought that the balance in our family was perfect, that I was just as cherished, just as valued. But looking back, I realize I had been blind. The signs were always there, small and easy to overlook at first. The way my parents' eyes lingered on Emma just a little longer when she spoke. The way they celebrated her achievements with a little more enthusiasm, their voices just a little prouder when they spoke of her accomplishments. At the time, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just my imagination. Just the natural way parents doted on the youngest child. I didn't know then what I know now. I didn't know that love, in my family, was not something given freely. It was something weighed, measured, and, in the end, unevenly distributed. As the years passed, our home remained the same, a picturesque little world where everything appeared perfect on the surface. The smell of my mother's baking still filled the air, my father still came home every evening with his briefcase in one hand and his coffee mug in the other, and Emma still danced across the living room floor as if she owned the space. And for the most part, I still believed we were a happy family. I had my own corner of the world, my own small victories. I excelled in school, earning straight A's, winning essay competitions, getting certificates that I proudly tacked onto my bedroom wall. I spent weekends at the library, working on research papers far more advanced than my grade level required, preparing for a future I envisioned as bright and full of promise. Emma had her victories, too, though they were of a different kind. She was a natural performer. Ballet, gymnastics, cheerleading, you name it, she shined in it. My parents attended every recital, every competition, sitting front and center, clapping the loudest when she took the stage. I told myself it was normal. She was in the spotlight because she was good at what she did. I didn't mind, really. I preferred the quiet, the solitude of my books, the predictability of numbers and facts over the chaotic energy of performance. But little things began to pile up. Whenever Emma won a trophy, it was displayed on the mantel for weeks, polished and admired. My certificates? They were acknowledged with a quick, "Good job, honey," before being tucked into a drawer somewhere. If Emma had a school event, my parents would rearrange their schedules to be there, no matter how last minute it was. When I had a debate tournament, I was often told, "We'll try our best," which usually meant, "We probably won't make it." It wasn't just about achievements, either. When Emma wanted a new dress for a school dance, she got it, no questions asked. When I needed a new pair of shoes because mine had holes in them, my mother sighed and said, "Can't you make them last a little longer?" Still, I didn't let it get to me. Not at first. I reasoned with myself. Emma was younger, she needed more attention, she was more outgoing, more social, and maybe that's just how things were. Maybe it wasn't favoritism. Maybe I was just looking for something that wasn't there. I kept my head down, kept studying, kept preparing for the future I was determined to build for myself. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I just kept proving my worth, my time would come. But time has a way of revealing the truth, whether you're ready for it or not. Because no matter how much I achieved, no matter how many accolades I earned, it would never be enough. Not in this family. It started with the little things, the small, almost unnoticeable ways my parents' favoritism toward Emma began to surface. But little things pile up. And eventually, they become impossible to ignore. At school, I was known for being the smart one. Teachers praised me, guidance counselors recommended me for honors programs, and I even won a few scholarships before I had finished high school. My parents always nodded approvingly, told me they were proud, in that absent-minded way parents do when they're only half listening. Emma, on the other hand, was the golden child. She wasn't the smartest student, but she didn't need to be. She had charm. She had presence. While I was studying for exams and submitting college applications, Emma was busy being homecoming queen, getting elected as student council president, despite barely attending meetings, and charming every teacher into giving her an extension when she forgot an assignment. And my parents ate it up. "She's got that special spark," my mom would say, beaming when Emma waltzed into the room, gushing about the latest thing she was involved in. "She just knows how to light up a room." Whenever I reminded them that I had something coming up, an academic award ceremony, a college visit, there was always an excuse. "Oh, sweetheart, we'd love to, but your sister has a big game that night." Or, "Can't you go by yourself? You're so independent, you don't need us there." Emma needed them. I didn't. At least, that's what they believed. Then came the money. I never asked for much. I applied for scholarships, took on small tutoring jobs, and saved every dollar I could. I knew that if I wanted to go to a good university, I'd have to make it happen myself. My parents had made it clear early on that there wasn't a college fund waiting for me. "We'll help out where we can," they said. "But you'll need to be responsible for yourself." That rule, of course, didn't apply to Emma. Emma decided, at the last minute, of course, that she wanted to go to an expensive private university out of state. She hadn't prepared for it, hadn't applied for financial aid, hadn't thought about tuition costs. She just assumed it would work out. And my parents made sure it did. They pulled money from their savings, asked family members for small loans, and even talked about taking out a second mortgage on the house to make sure Emma got everything she wanted. I remember standing in the kitchen that night, listening to them talk about it and feeling something cold settle in my chest. "You told me we didn't have money for college," I said, my voice quiet. Mom sighed, as if I was bringing up something inconvenient. "Well, sweetheart, you're different. You're so responsible. You got those scholarships. You don't need our help the way Emma does." That was the moment I realized. It wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't just that Emma got more attention, more praise, more love. It was that, in their eyes, she deserved more. And I never would. The day they took my money, I stopped seeing them as my parents. I had worked for years, saving every extra dollar from tutoring, summer jobs, and merit-based awards. Every late-night shift, every sacrifice, every time I chose work over fun, I did it all with one goal in mind: securing my future. Unlike Emma, I never expected things to be handed to me. I knew that if I wanted to go to college without drowning in debt, I had to be smart, responsible, and disciplined. And I was. By the time I was ready to leave for university, I had managed to save up over $20,000. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but with my scholarships and a part-time job, I knew I could make it work. That money was my safety net, something I had built entirely on my own. And then, one evening, my parents sat me down in the living room. "Sweetheart," my father started, wearing the same overly gentle expression he always used when he was about to say something I wouldn't like. "We need to talk about something important." My mother sat beside him, nodding with feigned concern. Across from me, Emma twirled a strand of her golden hair around her finger, looking bored, as if she already knew what was coming. "We need your help," my mother added. "It's about your sister's tuition." I went still. "What do you mean?" I asked slowly, already feeling the knot tightening in my stomach. "Well," my father sighed, as if this was all so difficult for them. "Emma's school costs more than we expected. We've done everything we can, moved some money around, borrowed a little from family, but it's not enough. We need $20,000 to cover her first year." I stared at them, my hands clenched into fists. And my mother said, as if it were obvious, "We were hoping you could help. You've saved up so much money, and you're getting scholarships. You won't need all of it." My heart pounded. "You're asking me to give Emma my college fund?" They exchanged a glance. My father cleared his throat. "Not give, exactly. More like, contribute." Emma, who had been silent until now, let out a dramatic sigh. "Oh my God, why are you acting like this is a big deal? You're always so stingy." She rolled her eyes. "It's just money. Just money. Just the years of work I had put in, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the hope I had clung to." I looked back at my parents, searching their faces for some sign of hesitation, some recognition of how deeply unfair this was. But there was nothing. They weren't ashamed. They weren't regretful. They were entitled. And in that moment, I understood. Emma had never had to work for anything in her life, because she always knew my parents would make sure she got what she wanted. She never had to save, plan, or sacrifice, because if she needed money, if she needed anything, all she had to do was smile, and they would take it from someone else. And this time, that someone was me. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "That money is mine." My mother gasped, as if I had just slapped her. "How can you be so selfish? This is your sister's future we're talking about. What about my future?" I shot back. "I worked for that money. You told me you couldn't help me with college, but now you suddenly have the resources for Emma? She needs it more than you," my father said, his voice cold and final. "You'll be fine without it." I turned to Emma, who looked completely unbothered, filing her nails like this conversation was a minor inconvenience. "And what about you?" I demanded. "Why should I give up everything I worked for so you can waltz through life without consequences?" She just smirked. "Because they love me more." Silence. My parents didn't correct her. They didn't tell her she was wrong. They just looked at me, expectant, waiting for me to do what they had already decided I would. And in the end, it didn't matter what I said. Because they took it anyway. They had access to my savings account. I had trusted them, like an idiot. The next morning, when I went to check my balance, the $20,000 was gone. I sat there, staring at the empty space where my future used to be, and felt something inside me snap. They thought I would accept this. They thought I would move on. They thought I would forgive them. They were wrong. I didn't cry. Not when I saw my empty bank account, not when my parents acted like nothing had happened, not even when Emma started gushing about how everything worked out for her tuition. I wanted to scream, to rage, to throw something just to hear it shatter, but I didn't. Instead, I sat in my room, my fists clenched so tightly that my nails left half-moons in my palms, and I thought. I thought about how every sacrifice I had made meant nothing to them. How every time I had been told we couldn't afford something, they had been lying. They could afford things, just not for me. They could sacrifice, but only when it benefited Emma. And now, after all the years of being second place, after all the times I had convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, I was imagining it, there was no denying it anymore. My parents didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a resource. Something to be used when needed and discarded when I was no longer convenient. That night, I listened to them laugh over dinner, talking about Emma's future at her new school, completely unbothered by what they had done. My mother was already planning how she would decorate Emma's dorm, what she would send in care packages. My father was discussing the best way to move money around for next semester. Emma sat at the center of it all, glowing with satisfaction, knowing she had won. They didn't care that they had taken my future from me. They didn't even acknowledge it. I had never felt hatred before, not like this. It was a slow, cold thing, curling in my stomach like smoke. I had been naive to think that if I worked hard enough, if I was patient, if I did everything right, they would finally see me. That they would finally care. But I understood now. They never would. I thought about leaving. I could take out loans, put as much distance between me and them as possible, start fresh. But the idea of them getting away with it, of Emma reaping the rewards of my labor while I struggled, was unbearable. No, I couldn't just walk away. They needed to feel what I felt. They needed to lose something that mattered to them. They needed to know what it was like to have their security ripped away overnight. So, I waited. I went through the motions. I pretended to move on. I smiled when my mother talked about Emma's classes, nodded along when my father mentioned how we had all worked together to make things happen for her. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I let them believe I had accepted my place. And slowly, I began to plan. My parents had stretched themselves thin financially to send Emma to that private university. I overheard them talking about it late one night, how they were barely covering the costs, how they would need to be extra careful for the next few months until things stabilized. But they weren't worried. They had always been good with money. Responsible. There was a plan in place. And that plan depended on one thing, a lump sum payment they had set aside to cover Emma's second semester. It wasn't much compared to the total cost, but it was enough that if something were to happen to it, they would be in trouble. I knew where they kept their savings. I knew their passwords, their habits. For years, they had relied on me to help with online transactions, to set up auto payments when they were too busy, to organize their financial paperwork because I was so responsible. They had never once considered that I might use that knowledge against them. It wasn't difficult. One transfer. One moment of hesitation before I pressed the button, watching as the money vanished from their account. $15,000. Gone. Disappeared into an account they didn't even know existed. An account I had set up months ago, just in case. The next morning, I left. I didn't pack much, just the essentials. Clothes, important documents, my laptop. I had already found a place to stay, a small apartment in the city that I could afford with my scholarship money and a part-time job. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And when my parents woke up to find Emma's tuition payment missing, they would realize, too late, that they had underestimated me. That was the last morning I ever spent in that house. And I didn't look back. The morning I left, I walked out the front door like I was going on any other day, my backpack slung over one shoulder, my car keys in my pocket. The house was still, the sun barely rising over the quiet suburban street. My parents were sleeping. Emma, most likely, was curled up in her room, dreaming of a life that was still being handed to her on a silver platter. I felt nothing as I stepped off the porch and into my car. No sadness, no hesitation. Just a quiet, simmering satisfaction that deepened with every mile I put between myself and that house. By the time my parents woke up, I was already gone. By the time they checked their bank account, I was settling into my new apartment. I kept my phone on silent, watching as the missed calls and frantic text messages rolled in, piling up like debris after a storm. At first, it was confusion. Did you see the bank account? Did you touch something? Then came the panic. Emma's tuition money is gone. We don't know what happened. And finally, the accusations. We know this was you. Call us now. I didn't answer. I imagined the chaos that must have erupted in that house, my father checking and rechecking the account, my mother wringing her hands, Emma whining that they needed to fix it immediately. They would have torn through every possibility, calling the bank, trying to track the transfer, maybe even blaming each other for a moment before the realization truly sank in. There was nothing they could do. The money was gone. And so was I. Emma's tuition bill was due in just a few weeks. There was no backup plan, no emergency fund. They had exhausted everything to get her into that school, counting on that one last payment to keep her there. And now? Now, they would have to scramble. My parents, who had always been so sure they could control everything, who had taken from me without a second thought, were now facing the consequences of their own selfishness. For the first time in my life, I had the power. It didn't take long for their messages to turn into threats. If you don't send that money back, you can forget about ever coming home again. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined your sister's future. Ruined her future? The irony almost made me laugh. I let them scream into the void. I blocked their numbers, deleted their emails, and changed every password they might still have access to. It was a clean break, one they never saw coming. For the first time, I was free. The days passed in silence, at least on my end. I knew my parents were scrambling, their world crumbling under the weight of their own choices. The money was gone, Emma's tuition bill was due, and for the first time in their lives, they couldn't manipulate their way out of it. I imagined the arguments, the desperation, the cold realization that they had been outplayed by the daughter they had underestimated for years. I waited until the inevitable happened. A week later, I got an email, not from my parents, but from Emma. Fix this. That was it. No greeting, no explanation. Just 2 words, dripping with entitlement, as if I owed her anything. As if I should rush to clean up the mess they had made, just like always. I didn't respond. The next day, the messages from my mother began. At first, they were framed in concern. We just want to talk. Let's work this out as a family. But when I didn't answer, the mask slipped. You are being unbelievably selfish. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? Everything? They had given me nothing. And I had finally taken back what was mine. I kept waiting for my father to reach out, expecting the usual authoritative tone, the demand to do the right thing. But the call never came. That silence told me everything. I had shaken him. For the first time, he didn't know how to regain control. I kept my distance, watching from the shadows as their situation worsened. Without that money, they couldn't make the tuition payment, and Emma's school didn't care about their sob story. I knew the exact date when the payment deadline would pass, when the school would send the official notice. Emma was no longer enrolled. I imagined the moment she found out, how her perfect little world came crashing down, how my parents scrambled to find another way, how they finally had to look her in the eye and admit that they had failed her. Then, the final blow. I waited until I knew they were out of options, until the reality had fully sunk in. And then, just when they were at their lowest, I sent a message. How does it feel to have your future stolen from you? For a few minutes, nothing. Then my phone vibrated. A single response from my mother. We need to talk. No anger this time. No accusations. Just a plea. I smiled. I wasn't finished yet. The first time I ignored their calls, I felt nothing. The second time, I felt satisfaction. By the 10th, I felt something close to amusement. My parents, who had spent my entire life making me feel invisible, were now desperate to be heard. Their calls came at all hours, morning, noon, and sometimes well past midnight. The messages, once filled with anger, had shifted into something resembling regret. We miss you. We just want to talk. We're still a family. I almost pitied them. Almost. Emma, of course, had no such patience. Her messages were as self-absorbed as ever. Are you seriously still mad? Get over yourself. You ruined everything. You've always been jealous of me. I didn't block them. Not yet. I wanted them to know I was seeing their words and choosing not to respond. Then, my mother did what she always did, tried to manipulate me with guilt. Your father isn't doing well. He's stressed and barely sleeping. This is breaking us apart. Is that what you wanted? I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe they were breaking apart. But why should I care? Where was this concern when they drained my bank account for Emma's tuition? Where was their regret when they looked me in the eye and told me I'd be fine without it? They had no problem throwing me away when it suited them. And now, they expected me to come back just because they were suffering? No, that's not how this worked anymore. A week passed, then two. Their attempts to reach me became more desperate. They tried calling from different numbers. My mother even showed up at my apartment once, knocking for 20 minutes before finally leaving when I refused to open the door. I watched from the window as she walked back to her car, her shoulders slumped, her phone pressed to her ear, no doubt calling my father to tell him how cold I was being. I almost laughed. She thought she could fix this with a heartfelt speech, maybe some tears, and I would just forgive them? After everything? No, they weren't sorry. Not really. They were just scared. Scared of what it meant to be on the receiving end of their own cruelty. Scared that I was serious about never speaking to them again. Scared that, for once, they had lost control. And they had. For years, they had dismissed me, ignored me, treated me like an afterthought. Now, I was the one dismissing them. And unlike them, I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I had built a life without them, and I was perfectly fine. Better than fine. They had stolen my future once. They would never get the chance to do it again. So I did what they never expected. I blocked them. Every number, every email, every social media account. I erased them from my life the way they had erased me from theirs, and I didn't look back. For the first time, I was truly free. The silence was bliss. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of their expectations, their judgment, or their selfish demands pressing down on me. My phone no longer lit up with desperate messages, no more voicemails filled with guilt-tripping, no more entitled rants from Emma. I was free, and I intended to keep it that way. But freedom wasn't the only thing I wanted. I wanted them to suffer. Not in a childish, petty way, but in the same deep, soul-crushing way they had made me suffer for years. I wanted them to feel the helplessness I had felt every time they dismissed my achievements. The devastation I had felt when they stole my savings. The gut-wrenching betrayal of realizing the people who were supposed to protect me had never actually cared about me at all. And soon, I found out that they were finally facing the consequences of their choices. Through a mutual acquaintance, one of the few family friends I still kept in touch with, I learned that my parents' financial situation had gone from bad to worse. Emma's sudden expulsion from school had put them in a difficult position. Without her attending, they had no reason to keep justifying the reckless spending, the loans, the second mortgage they had taken out on the house to fund her so-called future. But the real problem? The reputation damage. Emma had spent years building her image as the golden girl, the one destined for success, the one everyone admired. But when word got out that she had been kicked out, not for bad grades, not for misconduct, but because the tuition hadn't been paid, it was humiliating. Their perfect daughter had suddenly become an embarrassment. And no matter how my parents tried to spin it, people talked. They whispered about the missed payments, about the financial strain, about how maybe, just maybe, the Golden family wasn't so golden after all. And then came the fallout. The second mortgage on the house? The payments had become unsustainable. My father, who had always prided himself on his financial acumen, was now staring down a reality he never thought possible, losing the home he had worked so hard to maintain. I wish I could say I felt bad. That a part of me wanted to reach out, to help, to give them one last chance. But I didn't. I let them drown. And from what I heard, Emma wasn't handling the downfall well either. Without school, she had moved back home. She tried to spin it as a break, as if she chose to leave her prestigious university, but no one really bought it. Her friends, many of whom were only there for the status, started drifting away. The social media posts became less frequent, less glamorous. And when I saw the first hint of real desperation, a single public message on one of her accounts, some people are so ungrateful. Family should always come first. I knew. She was talking about me. I almost laughed. Ungrateful? She had spent her entire life taking. And now that there was nothing left for her to take, she was angry? Pathetic. Meanwhile, I thrived. My job was stable, my new life was peaceful, and, most importantly, I was happy. I had taken everything they had stolen from me and built something stronger. But they were finally paying the price. And the best part? I wasn't finished yet. I always thought revenge would feel like fire. That it would be a rush of adrenaline, an explosion of triumph. But in the end, it felt more like ice. Cold. Quiet. Unshakable. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to gloat. I just watched as everything they had built on a foundation of lies and favoritism crumbled beneath them. The house went first. The second mortgage had been a mistake, a desperate attempt to keep up appearances, to ensure Emma got the education she had never earned. But without the money to pay it back, foreclosure was inevitable. They had no choice but to sell, leaving behind the home where they had once celebrated Emma's every minor accomplishment while dismissing my biggest achievements. The house where they had stolen my future and handed it to my sister, believing they would never face the consequences. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment across town, half the size of our old home. The irony wasn't lost on me. My modest apartment, the one they had dismissed as too small and unimpressive, was now mirrored in their reality. The difference? I had chosen mine. Theirs was all they could afford. Emma, stripped of her perfect image, had to find a job. No more designer handbags, no more spa days, no more luxurious vacations. She had never worked a day in her life, never needed to. Now, she had no choice. She hopped from job to job, quitting whenever she got bored, still believing the world owed her something. But the world, much like me, had stopped caring. And my parents? They still tried. The messages didn't stop completely, but they became fewer, more pitiful. We just want to talk. We miss you. Family should stick together. I ignored them all. They weren't sorry. Not really. They were just struggling. And now that they needed something, they suddenly remembered I existed. But I hadn't forgotten what they did. I hadn't forgotten how easily they had thrown me aside, how they had looked me in the eye and told me I would be fine without them, before taking everything I had worked for. So, I let them feel the weight of their own choices. The final blow came when I changed my number. I had let them linger in my periphery long enough, let them hold on to the sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, I would come back. But I never would. The day I cut the last thread between us, I sat in my quiet apartment, the sunlight streaming through the window, and took a deep breath. Not the shallow kind that comes from bracing for disappointment, but the full-lunged inhale of someone who has finally escaped. I was done. They had spent their entire lives making me feel like I was nothing. Now, they were nothing to me. And that was the best revenge of all.